All right, so we're going to talk about obviously adolescents with eating disorders. That is who I've primarily studied, researched, and spent time with over the past semester. And today we're going to talk about environmental and cultural factors that influence this group of individuals. So the first one we're going to talk about is how the media portrays these individuals and how they influence them. Media generally portrays eating disorders, especially with anorexia nervosa, as a need for Caucasian white females to get skinny, or the want to get skinny. And in reality, it happens to all races and genders and is usually sprung on by the need to be in control of something. So these individuals, they feel like their life is spiraling out of control. There's nothing that they can do about it. But what they eat or the lack thereof is something that they can control. So oftentimes eating disorders is actually an outward expression of OCD. Because of this portrayal, many individuals do not seek treatment as they believe they can just reverse the behavior. Like, oh, I can start eating again when I want to, or they just don't think that it's a problem until it's too late. So because these individuals are adolescents, family support is vital. They oftentimes don't understand what is happening to them, or they don't recognize that they need help, and family involvement can help catch early symptoms of the behavior so they can get treated. Those who are diagnosed with eating disorders and do not have a good family support have less favorable outcomes in their journey because they need that support at home in order to help them with their recovery process. And the role of peers is also a huge one to this group, because at this time and this age, you're learning how to function outside of the role of your family a little bit, and the peers really can influence how this group sees themselves. So they can be a influence for good or for bad. Peers are often the reason disorders come to light. There is a pressure to be perfect in today's society, and along with that and bullying, it can lead these individuals to start their eating disorder. But when individuals have a good support group and a good group of peers that really support their interests and their likes and don't put them down, then they're less likely to start an eating disorder behavior. Cyclical nature. Oftentimes, once you have started an eating disorder and you've gotten into the cycle of either binge eating and then throwing it up or restricting your eating, it's very difficult for you to break that habit. And once somebody per se overcomes that habit, it's very easy for somebody to fall back into the habit if they are in a time of stress, of high stress. If an individual can direct their behaviors into something that's not as self-destructive, they're more likely to find long-term success. But studies have shown that there is a little bit of a genetic link with the behavior. So if your parents have an eating disorder, if one parent has an eating disorder, you are more likely to start having an eating disorder, and the process can continue. I'm not saying that this is the outcome for everyone, but it is it's a very big circle. So this population group does not get a lot of support from the government. There, at least from the research that I've done, there isn't much support legally or politically. It's difficult for these individuals, as any care that they receive is not covered by, that isn't covered by insurance. They have to pay for out of pocket a lot. Mental health is something that's still very new to the healthcare system, and this kind of goes along with mental health. Excuse me, unless they get to the point of being so sick that they are in need of hospitalization. So this makes it difficult for low-income families or middle-class families who their adolescent has an eating disorder to be able to provide the proper treatment because they don't have the money to pay for it. So the cultural environment, any potential barriers. There's a lot of misunderstanding within the community about this population. And I think that's within any culture right now. I believe that America is kind of leading and understanding it more. But especially within the community near me, it's taboo to have any problems. People don't want to share their problems. They want this illusion that their life and their family is perfect. And that is very damaging to these individuals. And as far as religion goes, most religions within communities can provide the support needed to be able to get help if that's something that the individual desires and seeks out. On an international scope, I really couldn't find much on the acceptance or denial of this population. Within first world countries, I can imagine that there's a lot of more acceptance and more support for these groups of people. In third world countries, there's other issues that are just bigger and would trump any of this kind of problem because they are struggling to eat and they're struggling to find clean water, and the overall country is too poor to care honestly about an eating disorder. Socioeconomic class. Within this group, it's usually the middle to upper class that have the problem with an adolescent with an eating disorder. Lower income families generally just aren't as affected. And lower income families struggle with this disorder because they have a lot of disadvantages as far as paying for treatment, as was mentioned earlier. So generally, this is the only time where a low economic status or low income status is actually kind of a little bit beneficial to this disorder. Race and ethnicity. So from my research, I found that Black women and men often have bigger body types and they have a higher pressure to fit in because they have bigger bodies. And in today's world, in today's society, that's not ideal. You want the skinny everything. And so Black people feel a lot more pressure to fit that mold. And even in the portrayal of anorexia or bulimia, it's often the white females that are portrayed as having the illness. So Black people, Hispanic people, peoples of other cultures and other races don't feel like they're as susceptible to it because it's always portrayed as these white females. Then religion. So religion was interesting. Within most religions within the US, I found that there was actually a great support for these people. They can be a resource for these people to reach out and get counseling and to get help. They can be a huge resource. But there is a little bit of a stigma in some cultures and religions because some religions practice fasting, and not that this is generally a starting factor for an eating disorder, but it can contribute to that. And some religions don't believe in eating certain foods. And so once you start not eating a certain food, you can start cutting other things out of your diet until it becomes an OCD-like behavior and you're in anorexia, or you start having bulimic behaviors. So religion can play a part in having that disorder. Gender. So this was interesting to me as well. I thought way less males would be affected by this than females, and it is true that this disease does affect more females than males, but in contrary, only about, out of the adolescent population, about 5% of adolescent females struggle, and then there's 3% about of that population that are males. And males are less likely to seek treatment than females, and there's actually less options for males with this population, less resources for them than there are females. So there is a disparity there. And geographical location. If you're out in a rural community, there are less facilities and you're less likely to be able to get help. It's just been proven. There's not very many facilities that even can help these people, but if you're in a rural community, you're going to be driving hours in order to be able to find help for this condition and this disease. So that plays a huge part. Then bias. I couldn't really find any articles that specifically had a bias, but from working with this group and from studying this group, the implicit bias that I came to conclude was that many people believe that these individuals are weak-minded, and that's just simply not true. They're actually very strong-minded people. They have a lot of control over a lot of things, but they're putting all of that energy into something that's harmful rather than something that's going to be uplifting and helpful in their everyday lives. An explicit bias that I recognized were that these individuals who have this disorder are just because they want to be skinny and they want to be accepted by their peers. And that's partially true for some, but really it's a way of control. They want control over something, and that's what they feel like they can control, is their food intake and what they eat. So then again, on an international scope, I kind of already talked about this. It's difficult to find sources on an international level with eating disorders because it is relatively new as far as coming to light into the world and treatment for it and all of that. Wealthier countries generally have the most issues with eating disorders because they can afford to have the issue. There is the peer pressure. There is, you're not scavenging every day for food, and they also have the most support. In third world countries, like I said earlier, there's just too many other problems with illness, with disease, with starvation, with unclean water, and honestly just trying to survive, that if you were to have an eating disorder, it would get overlooked. So there's just not much research as far as internationally past that. And here are all of my references. I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching.